Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, from wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio, and I am the CFI York Operations Coordinator. I would like to officially open the third session of our VR XR Training and Education Knowledge and Experience Sharing Speaker Series, presented in collaboration with the DexR Lab at York University with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have longstanding relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Takaranto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the territory which is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event, our participants may be joining from various locations. So I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our moderator, our speaker, and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dr. Ahmad Mohammadi. Dr. Ahmad Mohammadi is a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Civil Engineering at York University in Toronto, Ontario, where he received his PhD in transportation engineering. His research focuses on applications of virtual reality in transportation safety, traffic conflict analysis, and traffic microsimulation modeling. Ahmad is the coordinator of Disaster and Emergency Extended Virtual Reality, DexR Laboratory at York University. He has recently collaborated with public partners such as York Regional Police and the Ontario Good Roads Association, and with private sector companies such as Og Signal Limited, to work on the development of a virtual reality prototype of an advanced collision warning system to protect police officers in high-speed highways. The 12th annual joint CITE student presentation competition in 2020 in Toronto recognized Ahmad's research by giving him the first place award. His research contributes to improving transportation safety and efficiency. His collaboration with both public and private sectors demonstrates his ability to use his theoretical training and formal studies to develop practical real-world solutions. Dr. Ahmad, thank you for moderating today's session, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the VR XR-based training education speaker series. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ahmed, and I will moderate today's sessions. I will pass questions, keep time, and ensure that everyone has a chance to participate in the panel. I'm excited to moderate the discussion today about the lessons learned from designing, implementing, supporting virtual reality learning in colleges and universities. We have a fantastic expert named Harrison, shares his experience with us. The total presentation time is 1 hour, but around 25 to 30 minutes is the presentation itself, and the rest is question and answer sessions. Please feel free to submit your questions in the chat throughout the event, so we will do our best to answer as many as questions that we can. Now it's time to introduce Harrison. Harrison is the CEO and co-founder of Up360 company. He started the company with his business partner, Matthew Melva, in 2017. It's already 6 years and has been working with academic institutions to enhance the traditional learning method with virtual reality. Harrison loves inspiring educators through technology and transforming an idea to the reality. Okay, now it's time to pass the discussion to Harrison. Now, Harrison, here you are. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you for the introduction. First things first, I'm going to share my screen. and make sure that I can still keep an eye on the chat here, and then also be able to see everybody. I'm going to talk about a bunch of things today. Any one topic that I cover, I could probably spend 45 minutes on. So I'm not going to do that. We're going to touch high level on a few different items, but totally feel free if there's something that I'm talking about and you have a question like in the moment, just to drop a question and I can kind of go a little deeper, based on what is coming in the chat through the questions. So without further ado, like you said, my name is Harrison Olajos. I am one of two co-founders of Up360. My other co-founder and business partner, his name is Matthew. Matthew actually teaches game development and game programming at Humber College. And I'm kind of on the business side, working with a lot of the end users. Matthew oversees the technical team. I want to talk a little bit about who we are as Up360. I'm going to talk about types of partners we work with, types of projects and things that we do, a little bit about our technology approach, because every studio is a little bit different. What we focus on, some examples of some projects that we've built. And then I'm going to kind of end off with some of the big lessons we've learned over the last 6 or 7 years, because there's a lot of them, but there is a couple that just keep coming up over and over again. And they're really great things to kind of just drill home. So first things first, who is Up360? Well, Up360 is a Canadian-based studio that focuses on using virtual reality and other forms of immersive technology in education and training. We actually have offices in downtown Toronto, right on 950 Queen Street West, if anybody's ever in town and wants to visit. And then myself and some of the other team members included are out in the East Coast in Prince Edward Island. We're a fully hybrid company. So on a good day, we maybe have 5 people in the office. But yeah, everybody works from a little bit of everywhere. And really what we do is we work with government, we work with nonprofits, we work with academic institutions, and a little bit of corporate partners to bring our technology into their education and into their training. We're really focused on trying to bring a new reality to education and training, because it's oftentimes a space that gets overlooked when it comes to innovation. So with virtual reality and with our partners, we try to make education more accessible. We try to make it more impactful. We try to make it more memorable. And we try to just make it fun and enjoyable, because in the end of the day, most of our technical team are trained in game design, game development, and they're bringing their passion for that industry into education and into a space with a little bit more of a higher purpose. Really, with the things that we build and with the partners that we work with, we want to ensure that the next generation of workers have the opportunity and have the educational tools they need to succeed. So in the end of the day, that's kind of our guiding light when it comes to working on projects and working with partners. Getting a little bit into the nitty-gritty, what do we actually do as a studio? So we work kind of from end to end. So it starts with ideation and planning. Partners typically come to us with maybe just the seed of an idea and, hey, we think VR could be used in this space. And we help them take that seed and plan that out into a proper plan. We bring the technical resources, the design skills and the development skills to actually produce whatever it is that we dream up. And then we help with boots on the ground, supporting end users. A lot of our partners want to build VR simulations that can be resold or scaled. And we help with that product management and product distribution long after things have been built. And being able to be focused from one end all the way through to delivery and post-delivery, again, has given us a really, really great overview of the industry and a lot of stuff happening in it, and given us a lot of good lessons that I feel people looking to implement VR will be able to embed. But before I get into that, a couple of other things. First, our technology focus is very different from a lot of other VR studios and XR studios focus. At some point in time, we decided that we would be focused on premium quality VR experiences, experiences built in a really powerful development engine called Unreal Engine. And the reason we wanted to do this was because Unreal Engine allows us to build the most realistic simulations possible. And with where the hardware is headed, realism for us was really important. The simulations that are the most natural feeling in terms of how you interact with the virtual world, simulations that have accurate physics, accurate lighting, and then are able to allow us to build massive digital worlds and allow us to build worlds that are multiplayer enabled, so people could come into these virtual experiences and learn together and train together. So most of our technical systems are built on top of Unreal Engine, and most of the experiences we build are built for PC-based virtual reality. So that's virtual reality headsets that are tied to high-end gaming computers. And again, that quick list there is kind of part of the reason we chose to go down that path. But there's a lot of other alternatives, and I could spend 45 minutes just talking about the alternatives and the pros and cons of all of them. But really, there's a few big decisions that people will need to make along the way. Part of that decision making is going to come down to hardware. There is a lot of hardware out there. And then the other part of that decision making that usually is tied to the hardware is going to be, what engine do you build in? The two biggest are going to be Unity and Unreal. But again, for us, Unreal made sense because a lot of the projects and a lot of the partners we wanted to build needed that realistic element, that natural look and feel, as a really key component of whatever it is we were building and delivering. Quick high level of pros and cons of our pathway, because any pathway you choose will have massive pros and massive cons. There's no right or wrong answer. In general, it just comes down to, what you guys are trying to build and what you're trying to accomplish. But for us and for our partners, the pros were, it allows us to build the best experiences possible. High quality, high frame rate, very graphically intense and realistic experiences allow us to reduce VR sickness. VR sickness is typically caused by low frame rate or poor optimization, but because of our development pipeline, we're able to build experiences that have high frame rates, and that reduces motion sickness and reduces, a term called VR sickness, which probably about 10% of people experience. But because we're building these higher quality sims, there's a smaller amount of people that might experience this in our experiences. Our experiences have longer shelf life because we're kind of working in this strategy where we're building things that are meant to work on hardware that are 3 years out, 5 years out, not really available to the everyday consumer. So we're kind of building products to sell later, not really to sell now, which is part of the con of also choosing this strategy. But in the end of the day, the realism, the high fidelity leads to better engagement, and most importantly, a better emotional connection to the content. And this piece is incredibly important, especially when we're talking in the context of things like emergency preparedness, disaster relief training, because the emotional connection to the content and that presence of actually being there in the moment is what drives better learning outcomes. And it's what drives better short-term and long-term memory retention. And the long-term memory retention is incredibly important, because when you're teaching somebody something that may never happen, or that might happen 3 years from now or 5 years from now, they really need to be able to remember what it is they learned. And if you're just going to deliver it via the classroom or via a quick video, they're not going to have the same connectedness to that content as if you give them that presence and you put them in the real thing, and their brain tricks them into actually thinking they're there. And that connection, again, is really tied hand in hand with long-term retention. And that's the biggest reason why we choose to build more realistic looking sims, higher fidelity sims, because we're working with partners that are really striving to build better short and long-term learning outcomes. But our strategy also comes with a lot of cons. And this is something to consider as well when you're choosing things like hardware and what pathway you want to go down with the technology. Because one, our simulations unfortunately take a lot longer to build versus something like VR video, where you're just capturing it with a camera. The hardware we work with is a little bit more cost prohibitive. Our equipment typically costs on average $5,000 to $10,000 for a set, versus the consumer devices that might only cost $500. So it's not something you're going to want to send home with students. It's something that typically we deploy in our partners' facilities and actually set them up with like a virtual reality immersive learning lab. So the students and the learners and the trainees can actually go to these labs and get the experiences on, hardware that they wouldn't be able to get, in their everyday lives. It's not for partners that are thinking short-term, immediate strategy, because again, there's a little bit of cost prohibitiveness there. It's not something that you're going to do massive deployments with, and it's something that, again, we're kind of building to be the highest level content 3 years, 5 years from now, as consumer grade hardware really starts to catch up and get more affordable. It's for those partners that are thinking long-term strategy, those partners that want to raise the bar higher, but no, it's not going to happen in a day. It's going to happen, over the course of several years. So again, some pros, some cons. It's just been our preference and the partners we work with preference to really focus on this direction. All of our projects, because we kind of know our niche and we know where we, stand now, they really all start with the same thing. It always starts with a partner who is super passionate about teaching a very niche subject, and they have an idea. And again, that idea can just be like, hey, I think we can use VR for XYZ. But we combine some of what they have with some of what we have to create some pretty cool things. Typically, our partners, like I said, will bring the use case. They'll bring that seed of an idea. They'll give us access to their subject matter experts, and our team, to a certain extent, will integrate with their team to really, dive deep into what it is they're teaching. They'll give us the curriculum, they'll give us access to their facilities, and then just as importantly, they'll give us access to the end users so that we can really understand who are these simulations geared towards, who are we going to be delivering them to, and then have those end users involved in the entire process. And then from our perspective, we bring that technology strategy. We've learned a lot in the last 7 years. We made a lot of mistakes that we can help partners avoid now. So we bring that tech strategy, help them make some of the big decisions based on some of the things that they're feeding us. And then we bring the development resources, we bring the support for actual deployment, and then we bring that growth strategy mindset, because we never want to build the same thing twice. We always want to build things that can scale and build things that can grow to be, as impactful as possible. And then again, together, we're building scalable VR-based learning experiences that typically are beautiful, they're fun, they're shared or sold to like-minded organizations so that we can diversify the way these projects are funded, and we can make sure that they're sustainable outside of the initial stream of funding. And one really specific example of a project that we basically just wrapped up phase 2 of, and we're now into phase 3 of, is our power engineering VR training. And this followed that framework that we love to work with perfectly. So we had a group of Ontario colleges, some of the colleges are listed there at the bottom, come together, and they were like, we have a really difficult time teaching our students about power engineering. These colleges have labs, but one, it's incredibly dangerous to teach students in the lab if they don't have the experience. And then they can't teach students on the dangerous scenarios and the one-off scenarios of what happened in these power engineering facilities. So we got together with the colleges through the generous support of a funding organization in the province called eCampus Ontario. We were able to get the funding that we needed to basically validate and build out the first prototype and then the second prototype, and then get the approval of the kind of the governing body of power engineering to say, this is something that could be big and could be impactful in their field. And now all of the partners post-funding came together, they formed a consortium, and every partner contributes every year to basically a pool of money that we're able to use to add more and more learning experiences into this series of simulations. And it's no longer dependent on outside funding, and that cost burden is shared amongst a lot of partners. So that's something that we always look to, even in the early stages of projects, is how can we move things through from pilot to scalable, sustainable, long-term project, and turn it into something that, again, can be shared with everything, because shared with everyone that is relevant, because we never want to spend a year building something and then only share it with one partner. It just doesn't make sense when it takes as many resources as it does to build some of these learning experiences. And what we're driven by is, again, like high impact, giving it to as many people as possible and helping as many learners as possible. We've done this in a bunch of different areas. We've done this in construction safety training has been huge. We've done this in the electrical industry, in carpentry. Right now, we're in the midst of building out massive solar farms, wind farms. We've done some culinary stuff. We've done some nursing stuff, and a lot of different areas that really follow that like hands-on vocational career or occupation or thing that it's just like hard to train people on in real life. Those are always the best industries and the best projects to bring into virtual reality, because I always say virtual reality is the closest thing to doing it in real life without actually just going in and doing it in real life. So a lot of the areas that we work in really just lend themselves well to the technology. And with every project we do, we try to fit it into one of three categories. The first category is the make it fun category. So in the make it fun category, the whole goal is just to deliver the learning outcomes while making it as fun and as engaging as possible. And as a team of game designers and game developers, we have an absolute blast working on the make it fun projects. I'll show you a really quick snippet of one of our more recent make it fun projects. This was something we worked on a couple of years ago with some college partners, and they're like, we need to teach people and be able to assess people on certain skills that nurses would have as they go through nursing school in the colleges. They said, we don't care how you deliver it, make it fun, make it engaging so it doesn't feel like an assessment. And then they said, do your thing. Here's what we need to teach. So our team was really inspired by the TV series, The Expanse at the time. So we built this whole series of escape rooms for nursing, for mathematics, for renewable energy systems. Again, this was another project that was seeded by eCampus Ontario, but now it's something that we look to do a lot of with different partners, make the delivery of that education and make the assessment that kind of happens in the background as fun as possible. So that for us is pillar number one. Pillar number two is make it realistic. We do a lot of make it realistic projects. That's the power engineering projects. That's a lot of the solar, the wind, the construction, where again, getting it as close to real life as we possibly can get it can mean the matter of life or death when somebody is actually out there on the field. So trying to train them for something that may never happen with the make it realistic pillar is something that we take a lot of time and energy and care to actually do. And then the third pillar is the push the boundaries pillar. We just love to work with partners that want to push the boundaries of what we think is possible, what they think is possible. So a lot of the projects we're in the middle of right now that some of the team at York got a sneak peek of a while back when they were in our office were things like massive open world experiences that are multiplayer enabled. And you can see on the slide here just two screenshots. One is a massive solar farm and a massive wind farm that's under construction. And this other one here down at the bottom is a massive construction site. So you go into these worlds and it's totally driven by self-discovery and curiosity. You go where you want to, and then as you're exploring these worlds, you're able to get different bits of training and different bits of assessments so that people can get into jobs that, again, they're most interested in. And then different things like interconnected locations. So you can travel from the construction world to the solar world to the wind world, and then staging it to be expandable so that if we partner with more organizations that want to build really specific training sims for wind or really specific training sims for construction, or even totally new worlds for manufacturing or healthcare, we're able to use the same framework to expand the different pieces of the project with these push the boundary projects, as I call them. But all in all, again, we've worked on a ton of stuff. I could go into a lot of detail on any one of these projects, but for the sake of time, I will not do that. Instead, I'll just like summarize some lessons learned, and then I'll open it up for questions and answers if people have any questions. One of the first lessons that we learned, and one of the things we like to lead with our partners, is that virtual reality is an amazing technology. Don't get me wrong, that's our whole business. But in the end of the day, VR is just another tool in the tool belt for educators, for trainers. It's going to help fill the gap for a lot of learners who are non-traditional learners. and it's going to allow teachers to focus on what they do best, which is teach. But it's definitely not for everyone, and it is absolutely not for everything. You know, a lot of buzzwords get thrown around, the metaverse and, you know, putting the whole world in VR. But we like to think we're realists. There's things that work really, really well in VR. And when it's used correctly, it's an incredibly powerful tool. But again, it's not going to be something that works for everything. So that's one approach that we really like to lead with, is VR is just a tool and it has its place. The next lesson that we learned, again, very early on, is that you need to take a facilitator first approach when it comes to not only building the VR experiences, but designing them and figuring out how they're going to be deployed. Because like any other tool in the classroom, if there's any educators in here, you'll know it's your responsibility as an educator, as a trainer, to get that tool in the hands of the learners. And if that tool doesn't work for you as a facilitator, you as an educator, chances are it's going to stay in a shelf and collect dust somewhere. So we really like to take this facilitator first approach, where we're building something that works well for the teacher first, for the trainer first, because if we set them up for success, chances are they're going to help the students and the learners become more successful. The next lesson, an agile iterative development framework works best, because there's no rule book for how to build these types of experiences in VR. There's a lot of little things that, you know, that work, but there's no clean cut, this is how you do it, 1, 2, 3. Working in this very iterative framework where you're building in, you know, 2-week, 4-week cycles, and you're testing, getting feedback with end users, allows us to create this loop of feedback where we're building, we're testing, we're improving, and potentially even changing direction based on the feedback we're getting, versus something like a waterfall approach where you just build out a big map of features and try to build every feature on a fixed timeline. These types of agile approaches lend themselves to the best experiences we've ever seen and the best experiences we've ever built, because the difference between a good experience and a great experience is typically that little tiny, you know, bits and pieces of things that you change along the way as you actually see people go through these experiences. So agile over waterfall 100% is the best way to go if you guys are going to pursue and build out experiences. The fourth, make sure your objectives are very cleanly and clearly defined, because knowing what you're trying to accomplish will help inform the plan. It'll make it much easier to measure success. And typically your first stretch of building something with VR is going to be a pilot project, and you need to know how to measure success to know if it's worthwhile to, you know, continue into a phase 2, into a phase 3. And then finally, it's going to be your guiding light when you get into the complicated decisions and the complicated pieces of the project, and you need to make a big decision. And in a development cycle that might be 6 months, that might be a year, there's going to be a lot of times where you could stray off the path, and you need to be like, hey, what's our objective? Does this meet our objective? If no, then, you know, again, help you get your focus by knowing what those pillars are as you go into building something with VR. And on the note of making big decisions, the first big decision you're going to need to make when it comes to building something in VR is on the hardware front. And that big decision is hardware, and choosing the hardware wisely. There's a lot of hardware out there. There's a lot of companies out there that promote their equipment as, you know, the best and the next generation. And like, you know, on paper, headsets look great. But you know, take it from myself personally and people in our company and our team, we have literally a shelf of every single headset, you know, that has ever been, you know, touted as the best of the best. Every single headset is incredibly different. So knowing those objectives will help you make good decisions around the hardware. The first hardware decision you'll really have to think about is, do you build for PC-based VR, which is where we focus, or do you build for the standalone headsets? That's a really big decision, and it'll totally change the outcome of whatever you do with the technology. Once you make that decision, I highly recommend just working with technical partners to land on a specific make and model, because you can't build an experience to work on every headset without a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of sacrifice. Because what I mean by that is, like, you know, some brands of headsets might have have a controller like this one here, which is like a long paddle and it sits in the hand differently and the buttons are different. So trying to make it work for every headset and every controller is a time-consuming challenge. So pick one to start with. Once you've got it working on one and you're happy with that initial, then you can look to expand it. And ignore the specs on paper, because again, there's so much out there. There's so much noise. There's so many hype cycles around the technology and around the hardware, and it's moving so quickly. Don't worry about the hardware on paper. I always say, go ask the gamers, go ask the people that use it, every single day and, play games on it, have clocked hundreds of hours in the headsets. And listen to what they have to say about comfort and fit, and work with your stakeholders, work with your teachers, work with your learners to make that decision, because again, it's a big decision, and making the wrong decision early on could lead to a ton of wasted time, a ton of wasted resources, and a ton of wasted money. So choose your hardware wisely, and I stress this one because we've made a lot of mistakes working with clients, trying to steer them one way or another with hardware. And we've always circled back on, we should have just picked one, and we should have stuck to our gut with, selecting makes and models that we see and we feel, are the best and the most suitable for the project. And then my last lesson before I just kind of open the floor to questions, kind of ties in with my first one, around, VR is just another tool. It's take a hybrid approach to learning, right? VR, like all these other technologies, are not going to replace teachers. They're not going to replace the in-person. They're not going to replace the real thing. Blend together different types of learning. Bring in-class learning with VR learning, with online learning, with at-home learning together to deliver whatever it is that you're trying to deliver. Because in the end of the day, every learner is incredibly different. So multiple forms of delivery will ensure maximum impact, and it will ensure no one gets left behind, because somebody might be more traditional, somebody might be more hands-on. So multiple methods and this hybrid approach, where if you're trying to achieve a learning outcome, VR just becomes a part of that strategy. It doesn't replace the real thing, or it doesn't replace the other forms of delivery. It just complements and embeds itself into that. Because some things work better in VR. Developing muscle memory, immersing people into scenarios that might never get to experience. But some things also just work better in real life, like, tactile, hands-on, turning nuts and bolts. And those things right now, maybe long in the future, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, they'll work well in VR, but they just don't. So make sure you're thinking about the education you're delivering in a very realistic way, and not forgetting about sometimes just delivering things in person, where it works best and where it fits best. So that is a lot of stuff that we've learned, a little bit of what we've worked on in a nutshell. But I think I'll open it up for some questions now, and happy to jump into any one area more specifically.
Thank you very much, Harrison, for great presentation. So one question is since VR is a new technology, how creating a startup in VR is difficult in terms of making profit and partnerships, and is it limited to academic projects and industry also is interested in?
So the question around VR, like starting a VR company, it sounds like that's what that one is, and making a profit. So for a company like ours, we've always played a very long-term strategy, again, not building something to sell today. So we've had a lot of opportunities where we've had to contribute a ton of equity in kind, or in hardware, or in like development resources. And in that, we might have lost a significant amount of money on projects. But through amazing programs set up in Canada with government, tax credits for research and development, getting some money back from the government, or applying to these different academic or corporate partnership collaborations, skills development fund, future skills center. There's a lot of opportunities where companies like ours have been able to tap into these resources to test things and to give us just a little bit of wiggle room, so we don't need to be driven purely by profit. we can stay focused on being driven by impact. And that's what I would recommend is like, if you're laser focused on profit, chances are you'll be building products that have like very short shelf life. Look at what funding opportunities are out there in government, even things like, the Canadian Media Fund. There's so many funding opportunities that startups can tap into, especially if they're working with the right partners, that can allow them to, focus on building the best product now and then worrying a little bit about profits later on. We've always been able to, maintain decent cash flow and be like cash flow positive, but we're heading into our first year where we're actually, after 7 years, going to show a little bit of profitability. So it's definitely something that takes time, but honestly, that's what it's like with all businesses. I've run other companies in other industries before, and it really feels no different. It takes a long time to make a profit. So do something you like. Don't do it for the money, and the days where you're basically doing it for free are a little easier.
Okay, thank you very much. Another questions is, hi Harrison, thank you for your amazing presentation. Can you tell me more about the hardware side? I saw you mentioned the XR training project your team working on is not for taking home. Does that mean it's only available on some special device, unlike consumer grade devices like Oculus Quest?
Yeah, so the hardware question gets complicated. So the hardware that we build for specifically typically is computer-based virtual reality. So it's typically something like the HTC Vive or the Valve Index, or like the Quest Pro, but tethered to an actual like gaming computer. So if you want to run most of our experiences as of today, you need a VR headset that runs off of something with a really powerful GPU. But we're experimenting with some really cool technology to make our experiences a little bit more accessible, so that we could theoretically pixel stream a non-virtual reality version of the experience through the web. So anybody, regardless of the device, would still be able to access parts of the training. But that's kind of a R&D piece. Our prediction is that the hardware is going to catch up, right? At some point in the next 3 to 5 years, consumer grade devices like the Oculus Quest will just be powerful enough, or the internet streaming will be powerful enough that you can get those super high fidelity experiences from, $200-300 devices. But it's a bit of a waiting game because we're not quite there yet. Devices like the Oculus Quest essentially have the same processor in it as your mobile phone. And because of that, you're very limited in terms of like the realistic look and feel of an experience, versus like a 30 series NVIDIA graphics card. And you spend just as much time optimizing, trying to get it to work on those headsets as you would, making them look and feel beautiful if you go the other route. So yeah, pros and cons, right? If you build for Oculus Quest and those standalone devices, they're very scalable. They sell well today, and there's a lot of immediate opportunity. But it's a short-term strategy, because in 2 years and 3 years, it's going to be like going from a black and white TV to a 4K TV. Once our partners see what that 4K TV looks like and feels like, and then they go back to the Oculus Quest 2, they don't want to go, and stay there. They want to always be watching and experiencing, 4K quality. So that's just been our approach around hardware. But gaming perspective, as a consumer, my favorite headset to take around with me when I'm just playing games is the Quest 2. But when I'm wearing my hat in terms of education, best experience possible that I love is, the high fidelity realistic stuff for PC VR.
Thank you. So another question is, thank you for your presentation, Harrison, and for being honest about the benefits and limitation of the VR. I really appreciate it. Okay, so
yeah, no, for sure.
Another question by Francesco is, hi Harrison, thank you for your interesting presentation. From where do you get the data that you have used in your simulations? Does it take a long time to collect this data, or do you rely on something else?
Yeah, so in terms of data, maybe you could clarify what you mean by data, and I'll talk a little bit high level until you clarify. With our simulations and data collection, essentially, since the whole thing is like basically just lines of code, everything and anything is like measurable and capturable in our experiences. So capture any data we want, from like where people are to what they pick up to like, you know, they put things on in the proper order when we're talking about like safety equipment. It's a relatively easy thing. I mean, it takes time, like any other part of the simulation, but it's a relatively easy thing to capture. We just like to be very purposeful of like, why are we capturing this data and what are we going to do with it? So yeah, so if you meant data of like, you know, analytics about learning outcomes, pretty straightforward process to capture it. But if you meant data in other contexts, feel free to clarify, and I can data on equipment or work environments. Yeah, so that type of data, that's typically what our partners bring to the table. So if we need to build, you know, that boiler room power engineering facility, the lead on that project gave us access to their real life boiler room. And we went in and we took videos and we took photos and we took measurements, and we used that like real life to inform the making of the virtual piece of it. And then we just worked really closely with the instructors to teach us of like, okay, if you do X, then Y happens. And, you know, if Y happens, then, you know, here's what will happen next. So it's a lot of just like firsthand instructor knowledge with access to the real life facilities. We haven't done much in the way of like, you know, heavy data driven simulations, more of just relying on that data to inform how simulations are constructed.
Okay, so I guess you have already answered the Francesco questions, and Dr. Scary also had a question, is how artificial intelligence in general and generative AI in particular impact VR development and applications?
Yeah, great question, because that is the hot topic right now, is AI. So from our perspective, AI is going to enable more social skills training within virtual reality. Right now, it is not very easy to have conversations with AI that sound natural, that feel natural, that flow naturally. So we're doing some research projects with a couple of our partners around using character-based AI to train people on how to have different conversations with people who might walk into you know, the emergency room, and how to do some of that assessment. So we're doing some R&D there, and it's like some pretty scary but cool things. Like you have full conversations with AI that, you know, are in virtual reality. So there'll be a lot more social skills training. There'll be a lot more like conversations that, you know, happen naturally amongst the experiences, and that will trickle into just like the gaming world in general. And then when it comes to the generative AI, so AI that allows people to like maybe spin up an image or you know, spin up an environment. I do feel like at some point in time, you'll be able to put a VR headset on and go, hey, create me, you know, a boiler room that is this big, that is this wide. So it will help with rapid prototyping. It'll enable people to quickly prototype VR experiences with little to no development experience. But I feel like the skill set will shift from, you know, doing the whole thing to using AI to, you know, get you a good base, and then using the skill set to really, again, take a okay experience or a good experience to, you know, a great experience or an exceptionally amazing experience. So it will just shift the way in which experiences are created, make prototyping and like, you know, rapid prototyping a little bit more accessible and a little bit easier, just like the photo generative AI is doing today, right? You know, plug in a prompt and you get a really cool 2D image that comes out. That will eventually happen in the virtual space, but there's a lot more considerations to building, you know, 3D interactions and models and environments than the 2D. So we still may be, you know, 3 to 5 years out before we see something really impactful in that sense.
And another question is, how do you deal with the safety and health issues using VR by your end users?
Yeah, great question. So we have some internal practices that we've basically solidified as like the golden standards when it comes to doing things like locomotion in VR, or kind of a pre-assessment of if somebody is, compatible with using the technology. We train the trainers on how to, inform participants, where it's, making sure somebody doesn't have, vertigo or like photosensitive epilepsy or something that may be actually like a medical condition that would not be compatible with VR. And then we just build some good practices around, sanitation of equipment in between use. And then we also have some really good practices in terms of like actual development. So some experiences, for example, use what I call false locomotion, which is basically you push the joystick on the controller forward and then, the whole screen starts moving forward. And something like that can cause people to trip and fall and like get very disoriented. In lieu of that, we do something called teleportation. So basically, push forward, point to where you want to go, and then you let it go, and then it's a subtle fade out and then a subtle fade in. So it just helps to, again, like keep people grounded and make that experience comfortable and make that experience safe. Luckily, we've never had any incidences from a health and safety perspective with the experiences that we've built, but you see videos of things like, the plank experience where people are like walking on a plank in VR 40 stories high and they like jump and run into a wall. So we use those not great stories to really help ensure everybody has like a safe, comfortable experience. Rooms are set up properly. Staff members are trained properly. And again, you have the procedures in place, just like you would if somebody's going to go do a physical activity or go on a field trip, in a school.
Thank you very much. So I have another question is, can you explain, I'm just curious about the mistakes or the course that you learned about the standalone or PC-based development of the virtual reality application. Can you please explain a little bit for me? Thank you.
So just in terms of that decision-making process, do you want me to clarify in terms of like that decision-making process?
Yes, and also in terms of the development challenges.
Gotcha.
That example, yeah.
So I can speak a little bit on that. Honestly, we're getting into Matthew territory for he could give an 8-hour lecture on one engine versus the next. He's very passionate about Unreal Engine and why we stick to that route. But from what I've seen from a high level, Unreal Engine is just fundamentally built to support the realistic look and feel of not just game development, but things like virtual production. So you look at any AAA quality movie or studio production like The Mandalorian, they use Unreal Engine to create all of those CG scenes. So the tool set you have to work with is really just designed and focused on making things look and feel more realistic. And they've really set their camp up in that space. On the flip, you have an engine like Unity, which is focused more on mobile games and web-based games and stylized games, and they've kind of set their camp up in that space. You can build great simulations in Unity, don't get me wrong, it's a good engine as well, but it's just like us as a studio, right? Like, other studios focus more on standalone experiences or more on like VR video production, and there's a market for all of them. It just really comes down to what one works well for your use case. And for us, realistic look and feel, natural physics, good lighting, that was always the primary. And for anybody who pays attention to where like Unreal Engine is now and like Unreal Engine 5 and some of these big systems that they've been building and creating, it gets us really excited for where that engine is going to be in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. So we've kind of set up camp over here versus in the Unity front.
Okay, thank you very much. And another question is, what has been your best VR projects, if I may ask? I know it may be difficult to choose one, but yeah.
Yeah. So there's some projects right now that we're working on that we're really excited about. I'll pick two. I'll pick one that we're in the middle of, and then I'll pick one that is already completed. For us, I think an already completed one was the escape rooms. We've always been driven by this kind of guiding light of like, we want to enable the magic school bus of, education for all types of learning. So anytime we can really build like a very thematically rich storyline and like have a lot of fun and have a lot of creative freedom, but still deliver the learning objectives, it really gets us as close as we possibly can to the Magic School Bus. So those projects, the educational escape rooms, although they were small in comparison to some of our others, I think those have been our most favorite completed projects. One we're working on right now that I can't unfortunately go into too much detail about because it's not something we've released publicly, but it's this really amazing project and series of education and training simulations with a massive multinational not-for-profit, where we're building these big, massive open world environments. It's a big, massive open world construction, commercial construction site, solar farm and a wind farm. And that project gets me excited because, again, it kind of brings it into the framework of gaming that a lot of like our current generation is used to, where it's collaborative, it's multiplayer, it's things you can go and do together and like use in so many different ways. And then it's something that we're setting up to be very expandable so that we can bring more partners into the loop and add more types of training. So that's a current project that, you'll see some point, probably mid to late 2024. But it's something we're really, really excited about and putting a lot of resources into.
And another question is, in your experience, what makes a good VR development team in terms of expertise and skills and relationship?
Yeah, that's a good question. In our company, we're just very focused on culture, on people, enjoying what they work on, in a very decentralized structure, so that no one person is in charge of one thing, and a very collaborative mindset and a very open mindset in terms of how people approach problem solving. So we built a team of people that just they love to work together. We've got good work-life balance, and for us, that's what makes a good development team. And then it attracts good partners that have very similar mindsets. In terms of expertise and skill, you probably want game developers. If I'm being honest, software developers can learn game development tools, but when it comes to virtual reality simulations, you're building games, right? It's just the games you're building are serious games, are games for education. So you want people who are formally trained in game design, game development, game programming, because it's that skill set that you need to build something that, looks and feels and, operates in a way that, has a good user experience. And I mean, just software engineers think a little bit differently than game programmers, although there's some correlation. Find yourself some game developers if you want to get into building a VR team. It worked really well for us, and we've got good people and are having a lot of fun. So I recommend trying to do the same thing.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Harrison, for the great presentations. Now I'll pass, I guess, to Dr. Asghari for the final words.
Yeah, my pleasure. And again, if he has questions or needs any support with anything, feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you very much. Sure.
Well, thank you very much, Ahmad, for moderating this session, and thank you, Harrison, and your team for a great presentation and informing us about the great project that you are doing. We all understand this is quite the new field, and what you are doing is going to impact future direction of this area. And we are really happy to be in the close vicinity as to say, being in Toronto, and you have your office in Toronto. Looking forward to work with you and collaborate with you as education and training, or using VR and education and training is part of our objectives, and hope to through CFAL York and our DEXR lab to contribute to research and development and use of this technology in training. And that cannot happen really without partnership with companies and people and teams like yourself. And again, thank you for your time, for presenting the great projects you are doing. It was really insightful, and thank you for answering all the questions. And I also thank all the participants for joining us today. I'm sure they have enjoyed learning about your projects as well. And I'm now asking Francesco. First of all, also thank you, Francesco, for doing all the coordination of running the session. To you, if there's any final announcements and things to do.
Thank you very much. I think that's everything. I would just echo my thanks to Harrison for the presentation, Ahmad for moderating, and the participants for being here. I would just like to remind everyone that we do have another session next month, as this is a monthly seminar series, which will be on June 23rd. So just keep that marked on your calendar if you're interested in the future sessions. But yeah, I think that's it. Thank you very much to everybody.